All right, well, let's go ahead and call this to order, 9:02. Just a reminder for our members to keep your cameras on, even if you have to get up for whatever reason, just keep that camera going just for the sake of transparency. Um, Joy, could you help us through our roll call?
Absolutely. So as I call your name, members, if you will state your full name and say present. Kelly Bradley.
Kelly Bradley, present.
Scott Bruins.
Scott Bruins, present.
Taylor Bumgardner. Sarah Burnett.
Sarah Burnett, present.
Stacy Earl.
Stacy Earl, present.
Casey Gessenhues.
Casey Gessenhues, present.
Paula Jolly. Justin Mitchell. Teresa Nicholas.
Teresa Nicholas, present.
Valerie O'Rear. William Owens. Amy Smith. David Trimble. And Chairman Bruins, we do have a quorum. I do expect to, David Trimble. He may just be running a little bit late. A couple of our other members, we still have some health concerns for William Owens. And so I did not hear from him this meeting, but I do not expect him to be in attendance, but he is still listed as a member of our advisory group. And Paula Jolly, who is a member and has attended most of our meetings, her father passed away yesterday. So she let me know last night that she would not be in attendance. So Chairman Bruins, we do have a quorum and can move on.
All right, thank you for that. The first agenda item is agenda item number 3, approval of the March minutes. I believe Joy sent this out some time ago. Are those documents also available in the chat?
Yes, they have been sent to the members.
Excellent. I'll give you a moment to look that over, although that should be readily available. I do have an amendment that I would like to make to the March meeting minutes. I believe it's the last agenda item with the integrating social, emotional, and academic development. I feel like we were relatively critical about this idea, and I don't think that criticism is reflected in the minutes. I can't speak for Dr. Bradley, but I know that she had spoken up as well as myself, and I know my opposition wasn't for the content itself, like those were, good, wholesome things, but I kind of rejected the idea that it be applied to and integrated with mathematics.
I concur with that. I think that's a good representation. It was just the heavy lift that we're putting in that area, and that it would be isolated to just mathematics was my big concern.
So I will make that note in the minutes, and if you want to ask for a approval of the amended minutes.
Are there any other adjustments or amendments needed for the March minutes? All right. Does anybody have a motion to approve the March minutes as amended to reflect our criticism?
I make a motion to accept the amended minutes. Casey Guest News.
All right, motion's on the table. Do we have a second?
I will second. Teresa Nicholas.
All right, all those in favor of accepting the March minutes as amended, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, well, that brings us to number 4. We're lucky to have Dr. Glass with us this morning. Dr. Glass, is there anything that you would like to say this morning?
Thanks, Nathan, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'll be brief, and I think what I'd like to say is probably just to preview what's on your agenda ahead. I had a chance to look at it, and I think you've got some really important concepts to touch on, so I'll just introduce those. One is the work around the Advancing Education Coalition. You'll hear from Karen Dodd about that. It's really the culmination of our listening tour over this past spring, where we heard from 1,200 Kentuckians around some of their experiences with education, both the good and the bad, and things that went really well and things that they wish had been different, and some of their aspirations for the future for education for their children and for the state going forward. So the Advancing Education Coalition is a group that pulled together all of the data from those listening tours and are creating different profiles of users in our education system and trying to present experiences of what's working well for them and what they need. So that really brings us to this sort of design thinking approach where we ask users, how's it going, what's working for you, what's not, and then we think about changes going forward based on what our users are telling us. So what we hope the ultimate goal will be is a vision document that will be released this fall that will point toward a future direction or a future vision for education in the Commonwealth that is built on the voices and aspirations of Kentuckians. So it's not a political document. It's based on what we actually heard people tell us they wanted and needed. So I'm excited about that work that's underway, and you'll get to hear more about that a little later. Related to that, we also have assessment work that is underway. We have two groups, two cohorts in our local laboratories of learning that are piloting different instructional and assessment systems with a focus on experience-based or performance-based assessments. Although we haven't scripted out exactly what they have to do or what they should do, we're really leaving it to those local groups to design those. Frequently, when at the state level, at least, the conversations around assessment and accountability just dominate our conversations. And so we're trying to think about how we could, we recognize these concepts are important, but really learning needs to dominate our conversations. And how do we make sure that our assessment and accountability systems are in support of rich learning experiences for students? So that's that work that's ahead. And I know you'll hear from Dr. Woods Tucker, I think shortly later this morning, to hear some about our equity work. And I'm really excited about this and appreciate the work that Dr. Woods Tucker and the team at KDE have put together around that, really creating an equity toolkit that includes several different components. One of those is an equity dashboard that looks at different performance measures of how different subgroups of students are doing in a district, and ask some questions around why those results are coming out the way that they are. And then there's an equity playbook that's also part of it that includes several high leverage strategies, proven strategies to improve equity in districts. And that's coupled with an effort that we have going on in our Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching, and Go Teach Kentucky, both efforts to increase the number of people that we have in the educator pipeline and also increase the diversity of the educator workforce. So all of that work underway. I'm really excited about all of it. And I think I hope I haven't stolen anybody's thunder that's coming up and presenting later. But I think all three of these areas are really important, and we look forward to your feedback on them. Thanks for some time to spend a few minutes with you this morning. I'm happy if anyone has a question, I'm happy to field that or listen, or if you'd prefer to just move forward with your agenda, I certainly can understand that too. So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn things back to you.
All right, thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Dr. Glass this morning? I know I appreciate your optimism. I think it was some of your previous comments from in a different forum where you expressed that, you know, maybe returning back to normal isn't where we should set the bar, that, you know, perhaps we can do a little bit better than this status quo. And hopefully that feedback that we receive will give us some good direction.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you raising that. And I see from the work that's underway in Kentucky schools already, I've had a chance to visit some staff teams who've come back together. I was in Greene County last week, got a chance to visit with their leadership and heard some of the things that they're doing. I get the chance to visit with some folks in Fayette County today, and I already see it taking place. People are really thinking about how can we build back better than it was. So that's the right spirit and the right work. So I'm optimistic about that.
All right, great. We're also fortunate enough, as Dr. Glass said, to have Dr. Woods Tucker here with us this morning. I saw him on the video feed earlier. Dr. Woods Tucker, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still with you, yes.
Excellent. Well, I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you. Well, first I have to say that Dr. Glass did an incredible job of explaining much of the equity work that we're doing. And when we look at equity, we define equity in education as really fundamentally an effort to ensure that all students, regardless of their background, regardless of their ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, their gender, the language spoken at home, that they have all the supports that they need. And what we've tried very hard not to get pigeonholed into this conversation about critical race theory. Other than me mentioning it right now, you won't hear us engage in deep conversations about critical race theory. We know that Dr. Glass and Superintendent Polio from Jefferson County Public Schools did an outstanding job a week or so ago in testifying before the Joint Education Committee about equity, and they answered a few questions. I don't think they could have done a better job in terms of what equity is versus this conversation about critical race theory. We here at the Department of Education, we're not about the business of jumping into these scholarly theories about critical race theory. We want to ensure that all of our students across the Commonwealth have an opportunity to succeed, and that equity focuses and recognizes that public school students, as Dr. Glass said very clearly, come to us again with a variety of backgrounds and a variety of supports and needs, and that's our endeavor. When we put together, Dr. Glass talked about our equity dashboard. The dashboard is one of several tools in our equity toolkit. So think of the equity toolkit that advances the education for each student and staff member in the Commonwealth as having an equity dashboard that will be inward facing, and that'll have different outcomes based upon the different school district. So you'll have that inward facing to address any of the opportunity gaps that may exist in our respective 171 school districts and our quote unquote student subgroups. Now, over a period of time, if we see there are commonalities from school district to school district, and they have used the equity playbook, and that's another one of our tools. The equity playbook centers around 5 tools, 5 strategies to address 5 of the most prevalent opportunity gaps that exist in America's public schools. And I'll just run through a couple of them with you, if you don't mind, Nathan. Obviously, looking at the work of disproportionality, students who are being suspended, who represent one ethnic group versus another. One of the other strategies that I really like, and I don't think we put a lot of energy in this, is looking at the allocation of resources, ensuring that we have our highest quality teachers, support staff, and administrators meeting the needs of students who need it most. Also, allocation of resources in terms of where are we spending the money? Are we putting money in areas that need it most? Then obviously, we're going to make sure that we have high quality instructional resources. Very excited about that. So those are 3 of the 5 tools in our equity playbook. And also, we're happy about the work with the Kentucky Academy of Equity and Teaching, providing a more diverse teacher workforce for our school districts across the Commonwealth. So those are some of the things that we're really excited about in building this very strong and very robust equity toolkit.
Thank you. I appreciate especially your last point about increasing diversity in the teacher workforce. I think that's, I mean, if you ask my humble opinion, I think that's where we would get the biggest bang for our buck, is having a faculty that reflects our student populations.
And Nathan, I couldn't agree with you more, and I would say the same thing, if I may, for Commissioner Glass, your Kentucky Board of Education, our governor and Governor Beshear and Lieutenant Governor Coleman. These folks have fought very hard to help fund Go Teach Kentucky, to help fund our Kentucky Academy of Equity and Teaching. We were given $1 million to help our school districts, to help our universities in partnership, and higher ed, if you will, create a greater pipeline through Go Teach Kentucky, to create a teacher workforce, as you said, that's more reflective of our student body. Because we know the research basis behind it, that when students have a teacher workforce, a teacher in front of them who looks like them, and I don't mean from an ethnic standpoint, who comes from a background, a socioeconomic background similar to theirs, they tend to do a lot well. And we are quite aware of the research when we look at the possibility of African American males graduating from school on time and even going to college when they have at least 1 or 2 African American teachers in elementary school. So the research is definitely there.
All right. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Woods Tucker this morning? All right. Well, we appreciate you joining us. Thank you for letting us know what's going on in and around our state.
Yeah. Well, Nathan, I do have 2 quick pitches here. I'll be done in 35
Sure.
seconds. And most people know me when I say 35 seconds. It'll probably be 2 minutes, but I'll be as brief as I can. We are working with the Council for Post-Secondary Education, CPE, and Dr. Aaron Thompson. Many of you know Dr. Thompson, in creating these modules. They are called the 4 A's. These modules are to assist us really in being more reflective educators in terms of looking at our strengths, looking at any unintentional implicit bias that we may have in our teaching. Again, we're not saying that people are inherently biased and we're biased towards kids. We're not saying that at all. But really, this is a reflective model. It's called the 4 A's, and we want to make that available to all of our pre-service teachers and all of our educators in general across the Commonwealth. We've completed 2 of the 4 modules already, and we're looking forward to rolling that out with CPE as well. And the last thing I'll spend here in my last 35 seconds, I promise you. Yesterday, the communications department here at KDE sent out an email asking our superintendents and our respective district leaders to respond if they want this service of this equity playbook. We are going to partner with a company to help us design specific individual strategies with our school districts to address, again, 5 of the most pressing academic gaps that are prevalent in American public education. And so it's voluntary. You don't have to, if this is something that you're not ready to take part in, that's okay. But we would hope that every school district in the Commonwealth would take advantage of this opportunity. And the strength of this is partnership. Hopefully, in the last couple minutes, one theme that should have resonated is partnership. In partnership with this outstanding group, the SCAAC group, in partnership with our educational co-ops, who are some of our strong partners in helping us to develop this playbook, this equity playbook, but also helping us with the professional development. We know once we provide high quality instructional materials and we provide in resources and professional development, we have strong outcomes. So I'm excited about this equity playbook. So if your district has not volunteered for this this service, this opportunity to partner, please encourage them to do so.
Into your, yes,
sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Bradley.
Dr. Woods Tucker, I was just curious what the partnerships with higher ed look like. I mean, I can speak for the University of Kentucky and the work that we're doing around the diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. We have a new doctoral program, and then we also have the Civil Rights Initiative led by Dr. Gregory Vincent, who is doing equity audits and working with Paducah schools, for example. And I didn't know what those kind of connections were in that K-12 higher ed.
Yeah, Dr. Bradley, they're very similar. In fact, I've had an opportunity to meet Dr. Bradley, Dr. Vincent, very, very engaged, extraordinary educator, and the University of Kentucky is very lucky to have him there. I would say 2 things. One, I mentioned Go Teach Kentucky in our CATE initiative. We have a roughly $400,000. I know the original grant was $500,000 for higher ed. Dr. Bradley knows where I'm going with this. Hopefully, not only the University of Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky University, all of our teacher education preparation programs across the state, I would hope, would partner with a local school district or a school district across the Commonwealth to develop and enhance grow their own programs. So that's about $400,000 that's out there to develop that program. And we don't necessarily need a cookie cutter type program. It's going to be different from place to place. So that's one way. The second way, again, in partnership with CPE, the Kentucky Department of Education, is creating these 4 modules in which what I call 4 reflective modules, in which we're asking educators to look at the practice of their teaching, to look at their engagement with students from a variety of backgrounds, to improve student outcome and to ultimately improve teaching. And so we're going to make that available to all educators across the Commonwealth, those 4 implicit bias modules, if you will.
All right, are there any other questions for Dr. Woods Tucker? All right, well, we thank you for joining us this morning.
Scott, this is Joy. I want to interject here after, if everyone has spoken to Dr. Woods Tucker that has questions, I want to make sure we don't cut him off and give him plenty of time to talk with each of you. But I wanted to make sure that you know that we do have 2 members that have joined us since we first started. We have Amy Smith, who is in attendance, as well as David Trimble. So I want to welcome them to our meeting, our advisory members who are in attendance. And I do want to call your attention to one other thing that I neglected to tell you at the very beginning of the meeting. This meeting is being broadcast live from our state boardroom. This advisory group is a governor appointed advisory group, and is referred to as an open meeting. And so it must be recorded live. And so the meeting is being recorded here on Teams, but it is also being broadcast through the state boardroom, so that we have guests that may want to come to and listen to our SCAAC meeting. And in fact, so we're up and running our live meeting in the state boardroom, and we do have a guest there. So we are doing that. This is new, and we will be doing that moving forward to make sure that we do have an open meeting available to the public. So I just wanted to let you all know that that is happening as a result of it being an open meeting. So Scott.
All right. Yeah, I'll leave the floor open if anybody has any questions or comments. All right. Well, then we can proceed to item number 6, Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education overview. Do we have Ms. Dodd with us?
I am.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you for having me. I think this is the first time I may have met some of you. So I'm Karen Dodd. I am the Chief Performance Officer here. Some people think that means I do performance reviews with HR. That is not the case. The performance we're talking about is toward state goals. So I help with setting those goals and putting together a strategic plan to help us get to those goals. I also oversee research here in the department. And right now, we don't have a strategic plan yet. We're in the process of collecting all of the data, if you will, all the input from various stakeholders. So with that, I'm going to bring up my presentation to walk through with you. And is everybody able to see that?
Not yet, Karen. I think it's coming though.
Okay.
Yes, it's up now.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Okay, so what we're doing right now, well, let me first talk about the purpose of this. So we've put together a project with all of these initiatives that are looking at how education is going in Kentucky. And the whole purpose is to utilize effective listening techniques and co-create tools and resources with diverse stakeholders for the purpose of meeting the needs of students, families, educators, and community leaders by changing how we educate in Kentucky. So the way that we're doing that right now, we have 7 different initiatives going on that are all being put under this project umbrella of advancing education. And I'm going to step through each one of these, but I just wanted you to see them all here on one page. And then some of these have been completed, and we're in the middle of some of them, and some are yet to come. So let me go ahead and move over to the timeline. So first is that survey. This is what we call the Keep, Stop, Start survey. And when Dr. Glass first joined the organization, or KDE, he wanted to get a feel for basically what's working in Kentucky, what's not working, and what should we be doing that we may not be doing. So it was an open-ended survey that went out. Anybody in Kentucky could fill it out. And we got some good input on that. However, because it was in the fall of 2020, you might imagine it was very heavily based on how teaching and learning were going during the pandemic. So although some good themes came out of it, we felt like our timing probably wasn't the best for such a survey. But like I said, it did give us some good information, but we felt that we really needed to do a little bit more. So we started talking about having this listening tour, which then became a requirement from the Board of Education that Dr. Glass reach out more publicly to everyone and really do more listening in that same vein. So through April through May, we had the commissioners listening tour. That was fantastic. If you didn't get a chance to attend any of those, I have to say you missed out, because we had our students from the commissioner's student council facilitate those sessions, and they did such a fabulous job. What we did was we gave them questions to ask to all the participants, and they were broken into breakout rooms. So we had anywhere from 4 to 12 different breakout rooms at any given tour, and pardon me, any given event, that is. And they would ask these questions like, when was the last time you received feedback from your school? And we were really looking for the participants to share their stories with us. So, if they said, well, a teacher called me about my kid's grades. Okay, well, what was that conversation like? How did that make you feel? It was really digging into and trying to understand the stories of students, parents, teachers, all the educators. And we even had community members there. We had a legislator as a part of it, business leaders. So it was a very diverse group of people who ended up attending this listening tour. From there, we came up with a lot of themes. And at the same time, we had these courageous conversations going on, which is something that Dr. Woods Tucker has been overseeing. And the courageous conversations were just interviews with people. So outside of the listening tour that was going on, we had some of those students, some of our leadership team, and others who were going out and doing these same kinds of interviews, empathy interviews with individuals. And again, gathering that same kind of feedback, asking people to share their stories, and it really ended up giving us some great themes around what's working well and what's not working so well in education. That takes us to the coalition, which Dr. Glass mentioned. This started in June, every Tuesday in June, which we happened to have 5 Tuesdays in June this year. The coalition would come together. Again, same kind of diverse stakeholders all coming together. We invited, well, there were 3 different methods that you could get onto the coalition. First, if you had attended any of the listening tours, you were invited to sign up to apply to become a coalition member. If you were part of an L3, those learning laboratories that he spoke about, we wanted representatives from those learning laboratories on the coalition. And then any critical stakeholders. So Dr. Glass and Chair Young from the Kentucky Board of Education went through and decided, who are some really important stakeholders that really need to be a part of this. And that's where we got our legislator, some business folks and things like that joined. So we ended up there were at least a couple hundred that applied, and we had over 60 people that ended up becoming a part of this coalition. What those members then did was to look at all of those stories and the themes that came from the listening tour and those courageous conversations, and putting together profiles. And he spoke a little bit about this. So what these profiles really are, each one of those groups. So we had, again, the students, the parent or family, teachers, or what we called school level leaders, and then we had district level leaders, and then we had community leaders. So 5 different areas. And first, there were a little bit of everybody in each one of the groups that met. So they were a mixed group of folks. that just kind of looked at some of those stories that were coming and trying to come up with some similarities among those stories. What things were popping out. Then they went into like groups. So students came together, families came together, school leaders came together, etc. And they kind of looked at them again and came up with more input. So they looked at other stories and added to those profiles until finally they came up with multiple profiles for a student, multiple profiles for a family that really started to tell a story of how these groups are looking and feeling and what's working, what's not working. So all of this has come together and is creating our current state of education. So this is one report that will be coming out of the coalition very soon. And each one of those groups is going to have a current state of user profiles. So it's everything that we heard kind of consolidated into these profiles. From there, we're going to take those profiles and try to flip them. What should it look like? So if some of those profiles, which they are negative, we want to flip that and say if education was everything we want it to be, what would the future state of education look like? What would those profiles look like? That's going to be our future state report that'll be coming out of there. The other thing that we have is the learning agenda, and this is where we get into the L3. So I'm going to go ahead to the next slide. In the fall, actually these learning laboratories have already started coming together. They're being developed right now. They've had some conversations, but we're putting together a learning agenda for them. And this learning agenda is going to contain questions. So for each one of these profiles, how will we get from that current state profile to the future state? And it starts with the right questions. What needs to happen in order to get us from point A to point B? And then those learning communities or learning laboratories will think with their own district or locale in mind, what are the questions that are really resonating with them that need to be moved from current state to future state? And they'll hone in on those particular questions and start trying to come up with a model for how to get to that future state. So they're basically these laboratories of learning, just like the name says, of really trying to come up with a good way within their district to move from one state to the other. And then we also, as Dr. Glass said, we'll have a learning communities guidebook. So taking the lessons that we learned from the coalition at the state level, what do they need to do to form a really good laboratory? How best to work together? What are some of the tools that we use that they can use? So it's just kind of a guidebook for them for how to conduct these learning laboratories. Then in September, we'll be moving on to student mental health forums. And this is actually taking place through the Lieutenant Governor's office. This was her idea. And the reason it's in our timeline is because she is going to be using our student advisory group students to help facilitate these. So these are going to be, from what I understand right now, they're going to be in person and they're working with the various co-ops to look for locations and dates and times to have these different forums. And as I said, they will be student-led and for students. So this is all about the students coming together and starting to talk about what issues have arisen, especially throughout the pandemic. But even beyond that, we know that a lot of students struggle. And so what are those struggles and how do they help each other, or what supports do they need that adults need to know about? Then in November is the summit. So this is where everything should be coming together. This has already been set for November 1st and 2nd. It will be in Louisville at the Kentucky International Convention Center, KIC. And we are having a whole lot of keynote speakers. I don't know if I can give any of that away yet, so I won't name any names, but the idea is for it to be a national forum, a national summit that we can draw a lot of folks from outside of Kentucky to come and hear what we're doing, but also with some national speakers, what's going on nationally in education. So we're super excited about that. You'll hear from those student forums. I believe we're going to have a panel where the Lieutenant Governor will conduct a panel with the students who attend those mental health forums. We'll have some share outs from the L3 communities on how things are going with them. Their work will be ongoing throughout the school year. So as they're trying to model some of this change that we want to have to affect, they will be there to talk about some of that and how it's going. We'll have some members from the coalition there doing some speaking about how that went and their involvement, and I think they're very excited about that. And if you haven't seen, we've also been doing some op-eds in July. So every Friday, I'm going to go ahead and close this out because I don't need my presentation anymore. If you haven't seen on the op-eds on Friday, you need to look for those. They've been really, really great. Again, we took somebody from each one of the stakeholder groups and asked them to write up a piece about their involvement in all of this work. So we had a student write who was very heavily involved with the listening tour. He was one of our facilitators and part of the coalition. So he did a really great article a week or two ago. We had a parent that did an article. This week, I believe we have a district leader that you'll be hearing from. Ed Massey, Representative Ed Massey is doing one of the articles for us, and a couple of our school leaders have done an article. Actually, that's the one that's coming out this week. Susan Dougal did the one last week, which already came out. So we're really excited. Those are great, and they've done a really great job of talking about their involvement and how they see the inclusivity that is happening at the department to really listen to all of those voices out there and really make a change in education, which is what we want to do. And all of this will eventually lead to us being able to set some goals and put strategies in place for how we move from what education looks like today to what it should look like in the future. And I think that's all I have, and unless you all have some questions for me. You're on mute, Chair.
Thank you. I knew that was going to happen too. Thank you, Ms. Dodd. I'll open the floor up for any questions or comments.
I just want to say this, David Trimble. I thought the listening tour was one of the coolest ones I've ever been involved in. The kids did such a good job, and I really liked the breakout rooms that were available. It allowed for some additional conversation, I think, you can't get in the larger setting. So I just wanted to say thank you for those, and I thought they were wonderful.
Thank you so much for those comments.
All right. Well, we appreciate the work that you're doing, especially in regards to student mental health. I think that's especially applicable as we're coming out of this pandemic, like you mentioned.
Absolutely.
If there's no other questions or comments, we can move to item 7. Assessment accountability updates. Rhonda, are you with us?
I certainly am. It's good to see
Excellent.
Everyone today.
Yeah, good to see you too.
And I think we have Jennifer online as well. And so we just wanted to kind of give you some updates. You've been hearing some exciting new work that's evolving, and our office will be supporting the learning agenda work around the coalitions. And so we're heavily involved with that. And we've been listening and monitoring because eventually, there will be impact into the assessment and accountability system. So before we get to that stage, though, we have reporting this fall, And we do not have accountability this fall, but reporting of assessment results. And we want to kind of give you a preview of the fall, what we expect with testing in the spring, and just kind of give you a sense of kind of where we are. We're at that little star on the map. Here's where we are now and what we're moving to in the immediate future. And I see Jennifer's online and on camera. And so I think we have a PowerPoint we're going to share with you as well to just kind of walk you through some of the current things that we're working on in assessment accountability.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you see my screen?
We can, Jennifer.
Oh, good. Great. Well, again, we really appreciate the conversation this morning, and it feeds right into where we're going with our assessment and accountability overview. We're first going to talk about what happened in assessment and accountability this past spring, kind of what happened in 2020-2021, and talk about the reporting for that time frame. We're going to look at what's upcoming. As Joy Barr says, there's a lot of things to look forward to, so we want to share with you some of the upcoming events for the 21-22 school year, and then talk about the long-term future of accountability and the changes brought about by Senate Bill 158 during 2020 and other regulatory amendments that are a result of a federal U.S. Department of Education audit. So good agenda, and we'll pause along the way to take your questions and any feedback that you have at this point. So with, I'm in presentation mode, so if someone would monitor chat and just or pause or just interrupt me if there are any questions or anything along the way. So let's start with just an overview of kind of the things that happened for the 2021 school year. In the spring, our school and district staff had made an incredible effort to administer state assessments this past year during the pandemic. Now, what we had is we had policies around administering the assessments in the spring for the students that were in person, whether that was full-time, whether it was 4 days a week, or if they were in a hybrid model, like if the school or the district was offering, for instance, 3 days in person and 2 days remote, that those students that were actually in the school building were expected to test. So the school and district staff tested those students. Then those students who were completely remote, because our districts offered a variety of educational modes, and students were able to stay home last year full time. And those students were offered, we asked the districts to provide the knowledge that the students had the opportunity to come in and take the administration of the assessments. They didn't have to, but there was the opportunity to do so. So the administration was by our school and district staff was an extraordinary effort given by our school and district staff. The assessment administration across assessment programs was, the windows were adjusted. So all of our assessment programs, whether it was our end of course, our alternate assessment, our K-Prep, Access, our K-Screen, it was opened. Those windows were adjusted. They were expanded for the most part. They were either modified, increased, or pushed more toward the spring of 2021. Now, over the course of the year, we had a total of 7 ACT opportunities for our students to take the ACT. when the pandemic first started back in March of 2020, we had administered the first administration, the initial test day of the ACT in the spring of 2020. It was at that point between the initial test date and the makeup test date that the state closed down. So there were students who we worked with our schools and districts to identify that didn't have that opportunity to make up the assessment. Because on that initial test date, they may have been absent due to sickness, or they had closed. We had one district that was actually closed because of the pandemic. And then, or if they had a doctor's appointments or things like that. So we had just under a couple thousand students identified that needed that makeup assessments. So we worked very hard with the districts to offer those juniors, the students that were juniors in the spring of 20, to have the opportunity to take the ACT for the state administered assessment. And then we offered then all of the juniors in 21 multiple opportunities to come in. And we had a good participation in our ACT administrations. As far as K-Prep, it was a very successful online administration. Prior to the pandemic, in February, in early March of 2020, we had a successful field test of online across our reading, our math, our writing, and editing mechanics. We had a very successful online administration field test. So we took those learnings from the online administration and applied those to spring 2021 and had a successful administration. We broke lots of daily records for administering online assessments, and over the course, we were over 1 million online assessments administered during the spring 21 K-Prep administration. So it was wildly successful online administration. We got a lot of positive feedback from both our test administrators as well as the students. During spring 21, we also had a successful social studies field test. We had just under 54,000 students that took the social studies field test. Now, that is across 3 grade levels. So social studies assessments are administered in 5, 8, and 11. And we put out from the department a volunteer opportunity for districts to volunteer as a district. So we had just around 130 districts that did volunteer for the social studies field test. And again, that was online. The students in both K-Prep and the social studies field test, the students with special needs that have type of accommodations that need paper, they are administered the paper. So our students with our special needs who needed paper did have the opportunity to take the assessments on as paper pencil. As far as regular K-Prep, we had a shortened assessment based on previously administered test items that still measured our new standards. It was reduced in depth because of the fact that we did not want to take away from instruction during spring 21. So it was designed to be administered in under 60 minutes or less. And we just were able to meet that. Rhonda, let me pause here. Do you want to say anything more about that shortened assessment?
Sure, I can add just a little bit, Jennifer. You know, one of the flexibilities federally was that you could reduce the size of the assessment. And many states took that option, and Kentucky began to work toward that. We talked to the state board about that methodology. And this was all while we were waiting to see, will the U.S. Department of Ed say you don't need to test at all? But the direction was be prepared to test. We expect that you're going to test, but you can do some things differently. So we did want to take advantage of that shorter version of the assessment. We went back and used previously used items rather than our newer items, looked back primarily to 19. But we also wanted to make sure that the items measured the current standards. So a couple of places here on the slide, we use the term new standards. They're new to being operationally tested. They're not new to what teachers are teaching instructionally. So we've already made that switch to new reading and mathematics standards, and they are being used in the classroom. So it was critical that any items we used in the spring of 21, even if they were being previously used items, they needed to measure the current standards. So that meant putting together a different assessment that could meet both of those categories, that we could see something that was historical so we could have a sense of how students had done on that in the past, but also that it measured and linked to the current content standards that teachers were using. We did reduce the items down to 60 minutes, roughly. It would not meet all the elements of the federal peer review process. Assessments do need to pass and have a federal standard that they achieve, and there's multiple elements. They're called critical elements. We did not expect that the tests we administered in spring of 21 would meet all of those standards. That was part of the federal flexibility, that you would not need to put that test through a federal peer review process. But that again was part of that flexibility that we could take advantage of. So the other piece is that Jennifer has here on the slide is to keep in mind, because we are converting to testing the new standards, really this administration in 2021 is sort of the last administration of K-Prep. We've been using the term Kentucky Summative Assessment as we've converted to new standards. The first place we used that, I believe, was with science, wasn't it, Jennifer? That was the first new standards that came online. So we referred to them as Kentucky Summative Assessment, just a really kind of a generic name. And we will begin to use that term now for reading and math as well. So I'll pause there and see if anybody has questions, or Jennifer, if you have anything else you want to add before we move to the next one.
There are no questions at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Joy. We'll move right along. So that leads us to reporting for this past year, for the 2021 school year. So when we are looking at the 2021 school year, we did receive a federal waiver from accountability. Now, from the very beginning of last year, back even in September of 2020, the U.S. Department of Education opened the door for the opportunity to possibly think about accountability and a possible waiver from accountability, but they did not open that door toward assessments. So ultimately, we were required in the spring of 21 to administer state assessments because of that federal requirement. However, they were more flexible around accountability. So with reporting this coming fall, which is scheduled for late September, early October, there will be no accountability in the terms of there will be no ratings or any type of indicators. So you recall the indicators that we had in the previous system, such as proficiency, separate academic indicator, the transition readiness, and those indicators. We're not pulling all of the data into those big indicators and then coming up with some type of star or color rating, because all of those elements are accountability. it will be based on the students that are assessed or that were assessed in the spring of 21. So just the participation of the students who actually did take the assessments will be a focus of the school report card and public reporting. And then how they did as a result of the 2021 assessments. So it's going to be a combination of both participation as well as performance. So the participation is very important because we don't have all of the students that are generally were tested last year. So not 100% of students, and we generally get to about 98% of our population that's tested on a regular basis. We did not meet that threshold this year. And so it's going to be important to include the participation of our students within state reporting and within our local reporting as well when we're talking about the performance results, because it's important to talk about who took the assessment and who didn't take the assessment when we're taking into consideration the performance of those results. We will have graduation rate. That is something that the students were continuing to graduate. They were continuing to receive diplomas, so we will have the graduation rate. In addition, we'll have the Quality of School Climate and Safety Survey results. Now, this is the first time that we'll have those made public. This is a requirement out of our state legislators, the Quality of School Climate and Safety. It's perception data, and they were given at the beginning of the K-Prep online assessment, they were given a series of questions to respond to, and over a Likert scale from dislike to like, and then the opportunity to learn items were in addition to those safety items. And those opportunities to learn items got to more about the students and what they were experiencing during the 2021 school year. So when we talk about the opportunities to learn, we ask questions of our students about did they have access to teachers and instructional modes and things of that nature. So those type of contextual information will be made public in the school report card as well. And then again, it's going to be very important to put the storyline around the reporting and put it in context for each individual school and district, because there were a variety of instructional approaches and offerings from our districts across the Commonwealth. Even from a local district to the next district over, they took very different approaches to the instruction last year. So it's going to be important for our schools and districts to put that information as they're talking about the participation and performance on state results into that story when we get to public reporting. Rhonda, do you want to add anything to that, or Joy, do we have any questions?
No, I think the only, just to reemphasize that while the federal level says no accountability reporting, and we've indicated there in the third bullet, it does say we have to report assessment results, and that particularly, Jennifer used the term who took the assessment and who did not take the assessment. What picture is that? So this really is built off of what federally we're expected to report in terms of assessment results, this listing.
So as we talk through the performance, there's a lot of possible impacts on student performance that would include, as I mentioned, the learning disruptions. So last year we had closures. We closed to in-person for all of our districts across the Commonwealth. And we had, again, a variety of instructional mode. Other disruptions could be the access to technology, whether it is laptops or high-speed internet, and then access to learning support such as after-school tutoring or the supports that are generally put on under our special needs students, whether that the ability to be able to provide all of those good resources that are given in a normal in-person setting. Other possible impacts is the test modification. We mentioned earlier the shortened form and less time. I mean, that could have some impact on student performance. And then the participation rate. We know that it was decreased from previous years. We did not get the participation that we've had up toward 98% participation. And then what I'm calling an uneven participation, because a school may have gotten a really good participation in their students in getting the students to come in if they were remote, and then all the students that were in person. However, the student distribution of the distribution of students who took that could be different. Let me give you an example. Like a school district may say that they had 50% participation, which was good. But when you think about the participation, is that 50% all their females and no males? So you have to look at the students and who were actually tested and see if that distribution was reflective of the population within that school or district. The reporting timeline for this spring or this spring's assessment will start with August. We'll provide individual student data back to our district assessment coordinators. They'll begin to review that. We're going to have a fall data review for individual student changes, and that's important. This is an important quality control step. Although there's not formal accountability this year, any data that we release publicly, we want it to be accurate. So we're going to do a fall data review with our district assessment coordinators and our building assessment coordinators. We're going to have a quality control day that looks for statewide systematic issues. That's a general practice for our district assessment coordinators. And then the planned release is for the public in the school report card to be late September or early October. We're planning to present at the Kentucky Board of Education meeting in that 1st of October. And then the next step after that is this 10-day regulatory review, where we look at individual student changes again during that time frame. And then to get back onto a more normal, like routine release, our students that are incoming kindergartens, students are being administered the case screen actually now, and they have until after the start of the school year to administer this case screen. And we want to get those case screen results reported back to the board in their normal time frame in December of the year. So again, that timeline, timeline is reflective of what we regularly do in meeting those, because it was important to get the information out. Now, one thing I will mention is that we will be conducting research on the data, and we'll have more analysis of the data come later this year. So these are the reporting timelines, but we're going to have more in-depth analysis from our psychometricians later in this year.
We thought it was really important that we kind of return to a little bit more of a normalized process. I think this is most aligned to what we did probably in 2019, which is the last time we had a rather normal year of testing and reporting. But again, as Jennifer says, some of these normal processes that we used with data cleanup and making sure that if something's out there publicly, it's correct and giving people opportunity, you'll see that in that mix, as she mentioned.
All right, so that's kind of a look back at where we've been. Joy, do we have any comments or anybody's hand raised about that look back?
Not at the moment.
Okay, well, I'll keep going then.
Jennifer, can I ask a quick question
Sure,
about last
Kelly.
year's assessments? So was there any opportunity for the classroom teachers' feedback on the way that assessments were delivered or handled during the academic year?
Absolutely, they were. It's part of our normal routine that we do, like post, I guess you would say post interviews. And we did conduct those. We thought it was important to hear from the people that were actually administering the assessments. So those are generally held in person, but I will note for you, we did those virtually, and they worked fabulously. I mean, it was really good because people were in their setting and in their offices. I mean, it wasn't like that they were nervous, but they were very open. And Kelly, what I really was really impressed with is they wanted to tell us. They wanted to share the good things and all the hard work that they had done this year. So we absolutely did have the opportunity to hear from them. And I will tell you, we've taken their notes. We took lots of notes, and we have actually been working with our assessment vendors. We have face-to-face with them. We had one yesterday with the University of Kentucky for our alternate, and we've took some of those learnings that we got out of those exit interviews and are trying to make changes and improve processes for the upcoming assessments.
Is there a summary report of that anywhere? That's really, I was curious. I mean, I would love to read it. I think it's very informative. And I think that and this is not you all, I think as a nation, one of the things that we haven't done well is told those stories and celebrated those successes. And I think that would help in the transition from going back into this full round of assessments this year for families and the general public to recognize even the effort that went in last year to get anything when this year it rolls out to just have a better understanding that it may not look exactly like we want it to, right? Does that make any sense?
It does. So as far as a summary, there's not a formal written document, but there are a number of ways that we are sharing those stories. I have been on multiple committees, or if you will, presentations to various groups, and that is the first thing that I'm saying. An example is with SCAAC this morning. That's where we started out, because those are the heroes of last year, are the teachers and the administrators in the school districts, and they were just tremendous last year. So anytime that we are in front of groups such as this one, and you can guarantee that when we're in front of the Kentucky Board of Education in October, that will be the first and foremost thing that we start with. Although there's not a formal written summary of that, it is being communicated across all of our networks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Let me add one other thing too. During this whole experience of being in the pandemic, we continue to involve teachers in some of our routine processes in terms of assessment development, looking at the range finding kind of work that happens before scoring. And really, one of the things that I think was so exciting about this period of time is I think we were able to broaden out the teachers that were involved in the processes. Many times teachers are able to join you remotely, but they're not able to drive from far western Kentucky and be more in the central part of the state where most of our meetings are held. And so we were able to really engage people from across the state. This was done after school hours. And we just feel like that a really strong amount of positives came out of being able to really kind of ramp up teachers being involved in the processes virtually, and they worked very well. And so we'll probably even hang on to some of that virtual work moving forward so that we can keep a broader spectrum of teachers engaged in the processes.
I think just real quick, sorry, Kelly, did you have something else? I don't want to.
No, I was just going to tell Rhonda I really appreciated those comments. I mean, originally being from rural West Virginia myself, I've seen the positive impact of the virtual offerings on those kind of communities. And I just think I recognize that too as a higher ed educator, that we've actually been more available because of some of the technologies that we were forced to use, and I always say I hope we keep those. Right. So I'm glad to hear you intend to as well. Sorry, David, I'll turn it over to you.
I just wanted to say I think you all deserve to be commended. Last year was as obviously nobody was excited about the opportunity to get to do assessment in addition to the year, but I think that as a district, we have a great trust in you because you always try to communicate with us, and you have the best of intentions of using assessment for what it's for, which is to determine where we are and where we're going next. And I just think there was never a moment where I said those folks at KDE, they're gonna hammer down on it. That from your department and collectively as a group at the Department of Education, I think that partnership that exists between districts and you all is so important, and why people are so willing to share with you in online meetings and their excitements and their successes, because they feel that you're a part of the team that's always looking for the best of kids. And so I just wanted to take a second to commend you. I think part of that conversation you were able to have with folks after testing last year was because they knew you were part of a team and not some oversight group that's adding things to us, but you fought throughout the year to try to make that assessment shorter, like you mentioned, so that it was less impactful of the little bit of time that we had. And I think folks knew that you were fighting for our districts from your role, and I really appreciate that, and I know I can speak for folks in our district who felt the same way.
Thank you so much, David. Well, Jennifer's got a great team behind her and our data side, and we kind of strive for that, so we appreciate that. Appreciate the comments.
This is Teresa. Let me just add, I agree wholeheartedly with David. And I want to say, I think, and this is something that goes to commend your department, of course. I think staff across the state, whether it be the classroom teachers, the superintendents, the DACs, whoever it happens to be, I think they're so willing to share because your group listens. And I think that's blatantly obvious. You take the feedback. But you not only come into things like this and say you've asked people their opinions, but we know that you listen because of changes that come out from that, but also just because of how many different committees you all have your hands in or groups that you ask to respond. So I'm a member of this, but I also participate in some co-op DAC meetings, and we are forever being asked, KDE has asked, do we have any feedback for this? So we get together as a group and then offer that feedback. And we know that you listen. And I think that's commendable and very important for people to know.
Thank you. Well, we really feel like, and I know I reflect Jennifer in this too, we really believe like the product is always better. Everything is always better when you're able to take in that information and adjust what can be adjusted. So you add to us and help us be better every time we come in front of this group and every time we see you in other committees.
And we have had one very nice comment come in from Casey, complimenting you, Rhonda, and you, Jennifer. Says, yes, I agree. You ladies are incredible and work tirelessly.
Yeah, that's why we look a little tired today, probably. But no, we thank you for that. That's very sweet.
Very much so. I appreciate it. And you're all going to make me cry now. So. Yeah, we do. We have a great team of within OAA, and what we do is we work together, and it's the goal is to support our schools and districts and ultimately have a positive impact for our students. So that's what we're working for, and that's who we think about every single day. So that's appreciated very much. Let's move on now to looking ahead to the assessments in 21-22 school year, because we've noted that the department, the U.S. Department of Education, had come out early in the 2020-2021 school year and said we should be prepared for assessments in the spring. They're saying the same thing with the 21-22 school year, and including accountability. So we do fully anticipate having both assessments and accountability for the 21-22 school year. So if we look at the assessments for the 21-22 school year, as I mentioned earlier, the kindergarten screen is currently open, and teachers are administering that kindergarten screen to kindergartners or incoming kindergartners now. And again, I mentioned that the reporting would be later this fall. We're going to do a speech-to-text pilot in September, and I've got some more slides on that, so we'll go into that, which we're very excited about to be able to offer this pilot. We also have what's called an interim assessment research study. We are partnering with Pearson and using some of our ESSER funds to be able to look at administration of interim assessments throughout the school year. They have a product called Transcend, and that Transcend is for reading and math, grades 3 through 8. Districts can volunteer to be part of that research study. We want to, as a department and as a state, learn how to administer interim assessments throughout the school year that are based on Kentucky standards. This product is very customizable, and teachers can literally create their own scope and sequence or pacing throughout the year, so that that the interim assessments are based on the standards that they've taught. So we want to see how that goes, and if that's something that it may be an option in the future. We have seen legislation filed previously in prior years about interim assessments, and so if that becomes something that we have to look toward in the future, that we'll be ready with information about how to scale interim assessments. Other assessments for the 21-22 school years will have the access for our English learners will continue, as well as alternate access. We'll have the ACT. It's going to go back to our normal initial test date and makeup test date in the spring of 22. We'll continue to offer end-of-course exams for the students that are early graduate program that could possibly move on to post-secondary opportunities. As we mentioned earlier, the Kentucky Summative Assessment will continue on all of our new standards in reading, math, science, social studies, writing, and then the editing mechanics. So the social studies field test was again this past spring successful. We've had the range finding that happened virtually. I want to say a couple weeks ago at this point now. And so we will be fully prepared for an operational social studies assessment in the spring of 22. And then, of course, the alternate summative assessment will be based on those new standards as well.
And Jennifer, I think we had around, wasn't it just a little under 54,000 students that participated in the social studies field test?
That's correct, yes.
Which again was a tremendous voluntary effort given the state of everything that was occurring. So it says to me there's a lot of high interest in moving the social studies work forward.
The speech-to-text pilot, just so we're really excited about this new opportunity for our students with special needs. What is speech-to-text? It's a assistive technology tool that helps students with writing responses and their fine motor skills. So think about a student who needs a scribe that to actually write their answers. Since we're going online and all of our assessments within the summative assessment program will be online, this is another opportunity for our students with special needs to gain more independence. So it provides the opportunities for students to speak their answers, and then the computer will actually take and convert those spoken words into text. So this is can be used for students instead of a human scribe for the responses on like an open response or an extended response. So we're very excited. It allows for that increased independence. Other benefits are that it shifts the act of writing and the focus of the students. They can think about their thoughts and what they want to actually get on paper instead of having to write the responses out. So it allows students to more clearly express themselves. Hopefully it will decrease the number of test administrators needed, because that's one thing that we do hear from our schools and districts is it takes a tremendous amount of number of people to administer the assessments. So we hope that this really is utilized by our students and decreases the number of test administrator needed. And then there are many other benefits to text-to-speech, but those I've just highlighted the big ones. This is a small scale pilot that is planned for this coming fall. And if successful, then the speech-to-text tool will be offered in the spring of 2022 on, again, those Kentucky summative assessments. So we're working with our partners at KDE in the Office of Special Education and Early Learning, and they may have more changes to the students' IEPs or 504 plans based on this additional opportunity for our students to be able to utilize it. We're finalizing right now the details, so we're looking forward to inviting a number of schools to be a part of this small-scale pilot.
Jennifer, we have had one question come in from Teresa. Is everything going to be back on normal schedule? For example, will alternate assessment window 1 be in the fall and then window 2 in the spring?
We are planning for a more normal year this year, Teresa. We met yesterday, as I mentioned earlier, with our vendor UK, who develops that alternate assessment, and we are looking to have 2 windows. Now, to say that it will be in the fall, I can say that at this point. We're noticing that as school districts are submitting their calendars for the 21-22 school year, that they're starting later. We anticipate that is a result of some summer programs that they are offering. It could be impact of the pandemic. For districts that are maybe waiting to start later in anticipation of impact of the pandemic. So we're noticing that at least a third of the districts that have submitted so far are starting in very late August and many into September. That's going to impact the amount of instruction that our students in the alternate program will have prior to the assessment window. So we're actually looking at maybe pushing back into later fall, just a little bit, the opening of that window for our alternate students in order to allow them to have additional weeks of instruction. But yes, we are looking toward a more normal year this year.
Right.
Okay, I do have one other question because as Jennifer and Rhonda know, I generally cause trouble. So the speech to text pilot, and I understand what it is, and I know it's tied to the students with disabilities, a solution for the scribe. But has KDE had any conversation of that just being a tool for students in general? And the only reason I ask that is because I train on, of course, I'm district technology coordinator as well. So I do trainings on tech tools to use in the classroom. And I always stress to my teachers when I do anything utilizing something like speech to text, it's not just for your special education students that have a scribe. It's for any student, because all of our students will verbally describe and give you more details than they will actually write. So if they get to answer it orally, you're going to get more detail. And when we talk about the Kentucky summative assessment, it's content area tests, not writing, other than the writing on demand. So we really want to know what they knew. What we want to know is what the students know and or can do in regards to that content. So sometimes that writing can be an interference for any of them, and something like speech to text. And again, I understand, I know it's to accommodate for that need for a scribe, but then in some instances, you may be giving them a little bit of a boost up too, in terms of being able to answer when they can verbally answer versus having to write. Just something to think about.
I do think, Teresa, that's that'll be something we can feed into the study just as a discussion point. I think one of the things we'd have to check on is, when we use particular accommodations for a federally required test, we may have some rules around what tools you would be able to permit. And still be federally compliant. So we'd have to look at that legal aspect of it. As Jennifer says, this has been envisioned primarily for the replacement of scribing and to make that more an independent task for students. And really, it also, brings a lot of positives, such as really consistent administration. But I think you raise a very interesting point. Because our world is becoming more and more tech savvy, as we have all learned in the last 15 to 16 to 17 months of our lives. So I think it makes for an interesting sort of question to look into. But I do know we would have to look at some of the legal requirements around what you can permit during testing if you're going to use that in a federal capacity. So Jennifer, that's kind of a kickoff. You may have some other ideas on that too, or response to Teresa.
No, my thought went the same direction, Rhonda, about the difference between what can be offered to an accommodated students as an accommodation and what could be offered to regular education students.
But interesting, Teresa, you don't disappoint us. You gave us an interesting thing to think about and to look at. So I think very worthy of some discussion, especially you brought in that element of what are things that are permitted in the testing world that are transferable into the classroom. And obviously the more consistency on some items better, I think, for students.
Good question. Are there any other questions or comments?
Nothing in chat, Jennifer.
Okay. Then we'll move on to accountability. Again, this is the discussion that will begin for the 21-22 school year. So as a result of Senate Bill 158 and the 2020 legislative session, the Kentucky's accountability system has been modified. We've gone through multiple steps to amend the regulation once again. Michael Hackworth, I think that at this point he may have, if he has any hair left, it's gray because of the number of changes that we've made to this accountability regulation over the years. But we do anticipate the fact that it will become effective later this year. And for the 21-22 school year, the accountability indicators will be based on status only. And this is very similar to what we've done in the past. We've reported based on the indicators for the performance in for the prior school year. So that's what we're calling status now. And with the Senate Bill 158, it did bring together into the future, we'll have both status and change on the indicators. Those indicators are state assessment results in reading and math, science, social studies, and writing, which writing will include both on-demand writing and editing mechanics. The new indicator is the progress on English language proficiency, where it looks at the performance of students from one year to the next. So that progress, looking at the growth of our students going from on their English language proficiency from the prior year to the current year. So that's going to be a little bit different than we've done in the past for our English learners. The Quality of School Climate and Safety survey will be included in accountability for the 21-22 school year, as well as post-secondary readiness and graduation rate. Now, those there are slight changes in the post-secondary readiness piece. As we mentioned, the English language proficiency has been elevated to its own indicator in Kentucky, where previously it had been part of the growth at elementary and middle school and transition readiness at the high school. So progress in English language proficiency will be removed from that post-secondary readiness. You will note that growth is no longer an indicator because, again, Senate Bill 158 limited the amount of indicators to these and limited the department's ability to add anything to the accountability system. And again, I just want to emphasize that the accountability waiver for the 2021 school year, and so no accountability reporting in the fall of 21. So all of this accountability will begin to be reported in this time next year. We'll be talking about that for fall 2022. The change will come then based on the indicators. So for the 21-22 school year, it'll be based on status, that current year performance. But then when we get to 22-23, it'll be the status of 22-23 and the change from the prior year. So for the first time in 22-23 school year, for reporting in 23, in the fall of 23, it'll be based on both status and change in those indicators. Rhonda, do you want to take the lead on these next three with the impact of Senate Bill 158?
Sure, be happy to. So Senate Bill 158, and we've been revising the accountability regulation to be in alignment, and it's we'll look in a minute at the timeline for that work. But 158, as we've talked about for quite a bit, changes us to a model that's fairly similar to what California has put into place. And it looks at both status, which we'll define here in a moment as current year, and then change. And it defines those terms. It sets up an accountability system. Now, this is all within statute, obviously. It requires that we have a dashboard and that we have particular elements in the dashboard. We've already been using a dashboard approach for reporting for a while, but it really kind of specifies some things. And it stipulates some accountability dates for when the system should come into place, which is not unusual in statutory language. But those dates now, in reality, have been pushed back by a year because we've had the federal flexibility and we've had all the changes to not have accountability this year. We didn't test last year. So all of that COVID impact has impacted how quickly we can bring this into place. So as we move on to the next slide, Jennifer, on 17, this just reminds you of what the original dates in the statute were And now those have been pushed back by a year, again, because of our COVID response. But just to remind you, the first bullet talks about that you're to have status, which is your current year performance. Now, that is what Kentucky has used for many, many, many years, really since the beginning of any kind of accountability in the early 90s. It's been primarily about current year performance. There have been times we've had improvement goals and things that look at how you change, but really we're looking at a current year. However, the system brings in not just status, but change. And the idea that change is how did you compare to your prior year? So for students as a group and for any individual subgroups, status was to be determined really kind of beginning now. That'll be delayed until next year, fall 22 reporting, by using current reporting. Then change can't come in till the next year because you have to have something to compare against. So current year would begin in the fall of 22 reporting. Change we would look like in the fall of 23, looking at the difference between prior year and current year. Then as we look at the final slide to remind you about this on 33, there are 5 levels of performance that we need to show going from very high to very low. And then on change, starting from increase significantly to decline significantly, also 5 levels. And that we were to bring together particular groups to help set the cut points for when do we move from these various 5 categories to the other category. KDE is put in statute as approval, but LSAC will play an important role in this cut score process. We'll also probably bring in a standard setting activity group, and then LSAC would be doing some work with that and approving those final cuts as well as KDE. But again, the cut scores are to stay in place as long as we can do that, as long as they can differentiate stronger performing schools from those that aren't performing as well, because we're federally required to differentiate schools. This work, so beginning in the fall of 22, now that's delayed to 23 for full implementation, we will have more expansion of our dashboard approach of reporting. So you'll see what looks like a dashboard even this year as we report assessment results. But to be fully in place with the 5 levels of change and the 5 levels of status, that will take some while to bring those topics into fully in place in a dashboard of reporting. The Kentucky board did recommend using colors. We have used terms, we have used symbols, we had stars the last time we did accountability reporting. They would recommend a color system for reporting that lines up with what's in statute. With red being kind of in the danger zone, and I think we've got a bright royal blue at the top of the scale. Everything in the system aggregates together to help set and determine the schools that need support. So this is moving forward. We've aligned the accountability reg to that, and there's a elaborate process across time to make those changes to regulations. So I think in slide 19, we may have the timeline. That's right, it's up next. So you remember we've come to you several times with the accountability regulation. This is just to remind you of where we've been. This began with talking with the Board of Education in August of 2020. Right now, we're at summer 2021, and it's in review by legislative committees. It has been in front of the EARS committee, which is the Education Assessment and Accountability Review Subcommittee. It moved through that committee with no issues or concerns, just a few questions from legislators. And another committee may choose to take it up sometimes this summer, but if they don't, it will matriculate, and after a period of time, it will become effective. And so we expect the effective date to be in early fall. So we'll begin to use this again to report in fall of 22, and it will be for the 21-22 school year. Let me pause there to see if we have any questions. We'll look at chat here. Had a reminder pop up that covered chat. And then we want to just remind you of a couple of other regulatory things that we've talked with you about that are specific to an audit that Kentucky participated in with title programs.
Rhonda and Jennifer, it's Kelly Bradley again. Sorry.
Yes, Kelly.
How does the reclassification play into testing this year in terms of both graduation rate reporting and score reporting? Because if students are basically retesting on the same material, we hope they do better.
Right. Now you're thinking about the reclassification of whether or not a school would say move out of CSI, Comprehensive Support and Improvement.
I'm talking about the reclassification of grade levels by students, repeaters.
Oh, okay. Well, we have the supplemental year legislation, that has gone through that allows students to come back and basically repeat a year.
Right.
So that has moved forward, and there was a process that local school boards needed to make decisions about whether or not they were going to permit that, and it had to be kind of a blanket decision, not a child by child decision. So it's my understanding that piece of work is underway. I don't have a sense of how many districts are doing that or what numbers of students there might be involved with that. I've not seen a recent counting of that. Now, in terms of the assessment, I don't think that we really don't have any change coming forward related to that where the assessment itself is concerned. We will we'll show assessment results this year. We'll calculate graduation based on the G code that's been administered and placed into Infinite Campus for the students. But I'm not thinking there's another connection, because students other than students in the early graduate program that need to show and demonstrate passage on the end of course,
right,
for the way that program is set up, there's really not another place where the performance on the assessment connects to the students graduating.
So I guess my real question is the legislation, the way that it was written, was in response to students basically feeling like last year was not a successful academic year, and that they needed this for education purposes.
Right.
As an educational researcher, we've seen a lot of alternative uses of this year by individual families, right? We have over 4.0 students taking advantage of this reclassification, and we're seeing it highly tied to athletics. And so as an educational researcher and higher ed faculty, one of the things that I would think would be interesting is to actually track the academic value of this year for those repeat students.
Yeah.
And I think that this would be, I think somewhere in the system, especially in accountability and grades and those kind of things, I think it would be good to, I know, not individually identify them, but somehow tag those so that we can see if their grades, if they did increase academically, right? If the intent of the legislation actually serves the purpose or not.
Right. And that's a very good point, Kelly. And it's my understanding any student that participates in the supplemental year, and we will have to have that for our own purposes as we report and look at graduation rate, because remember, students become longer than a 4-year graduate. They become a 5-year graduate, so they have to be put in the 5-year cohort. And we will be asking that districts tag the student. There's supposed to be a flag or a lever button, I'm not sure the correct term, but a way to identify that the student is participating in the supplemental year will be put in the Infinite Campus student data system. So in the end, there should be the ability to pull data so you could see at least the number of students that are participating, and certainly you might be able to track assessment results if they repeated the test, if they actually took the test this spring and were not a fully remote student. you might be able to do that because, we'll expect them to take any test that's aligned. It's just there's not a lot of testing at that 12th grade level in the state system. In terms of looking at things like grade point average and that sort of thing, we would probably have to look to our friends at Kentucky Stats to see what might be able to be pulled out as sort of a data set for analysis and research.
Right.
But
we should
know who's a supplemental student because we're going to have to know that to calculate graduation.
Yeah, and I mean, we're seeing the latest numbers I've saw is it's distributed across all grades.
Yeah,
and they posted the list of the school districts that opted not to do it. That's another conversation. Is
sure.
Just there's a lot of comparisons here to kind of see that, and I know that you all are probably on that, but I would think with this accountability, graduate, all of these things that it would have to come into play in those discussions as well.
Sure.
So I'm interested as we advance to learn as much as possible about that. I think it's going to have I think there's going to be a continuation into the higher ed realm of some of these.
Could very well be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kelly, let me add one thing to that, just something to think about. And I think this varies district by district. So that supplemental school year, some districts, students are taking the exact same course load that they had. So they're going to take the exact same course load 2021, 21, 22 that they had in 2021. Some are not, and it depends on if the courses were offered or not. So then they're supposed to take a similar course. But in addition to that, if the kids are taking the same courses, and again, I think it's district by district, some districts may be just giving them an additional grade and that's calculated into the GPA, but some are replacing the grade. So you're not necessarily going to see any kind of impact or be able to track on GPA. So there's a lot of variety going on in terms of that supplemental school year and how districts handle it.
My understanding with the legislation and with just federal accountability is they can't completely replace it. There has to be a record of it because for NCAA guidelines specifically, it doesn't matter if they repeat, it's their first 4 years, no matter what, and they have to use the original grades. So they may say they're replacing it and they may in the GPA, but it's in their records somewhere. It has to be, is my understanding.
Yes, I think that is one of the rules that was shared, that it's not really a redo for GPA calculation or, just a replacement for GPA calculation. I know from the viewpoint of accountability, it really ties into graduation rate and, then we would look at repeating of some test if you were younger, the student was younger. But the biggest impact is that moving from a 4-year to a 5-year graduate. Very good research questions there, I think, Kelly. We'll have some interesting things to dig into. So we do have some other regulatory amendments that did move through the process with the board. They did go out for public hearing. In a rare event, we had no public comments on these two regulations. So it's very rare for assessment not to have some public comment. But I think most people recognize these are changes that were really primarily being required federally to do. So that means there's not a lot of flexibility on them. There were some clarifications of language and refining of things where we've seen districts misunderstand something or it's hard to communicate or confusing. So there were some other changes like that. But the two that were federally required really are over in our shop, primarily in assessment and accountability. We had an extraordinary circumstance category for medical exemptions. Sometimes those are things that are kind of medically connected. In a few rare occurrences, they were not medically connected. And federally, our audit said we can't do that it has to be significant medical issues. So we have removed that reference to extraordinary circumstances. Jennifer has said that we should think our reviewers, we've had this in place for years, we think the reviewers in the audit that was all virtually done had a little more time to look at things. So that was something that got pointed out this time around. So we've made that change. And then in the inclusions of special populations, regulation, we had always required that students complete the first grade WIDA access testing, which is the English learner assessment that Kentucky uses, before they could exit, before they could say they have reached fully English proficiency. But we were told that now that we give a kindergarten assessment, we have to allow students to exit from kindergarten assessment if in fact they show they're strongly English proficient. And so we have made that change so that students who score in a particular range with the kindergarten assessment could exit the English language proficiency program. And we do have many of our Kentucky students exit very young because they may have been born here in Kentucky, they may have always attended a Kentucky school, but maybe Spanish or some other languages spoken at home primarily, or at least half of the time. So, but our students tend to exit fairly early if they are with the younger ages. So that will be a change that students who do well on the kindergarten assessment, and we'll be setting that benchmark. We've looked to see if it can be the same cuts that we've had for grade 1. And that will be something that will be coming in place federally. So those are the two big changes that we had to do federally. Again, you'll see some other slight tweaks in the legislation. So in that regulation in its stage, it has gone through public comment. We didn't receive anything. There's no statement of consideration back to the board. So it will move on here in the next few days to the legislative hearing process. So I'll pause there. Jennifer, did we have anything else you want to emphasize on the regulations? And I don't see new questions in chat, but that's to give you kind of a sense of what's going on in the assessment world. Again, along with this very exciting work of the coalition that I think has real implications for future what assessment might look like in Kentucky, or how it might be paired with the kinds of things we do now. So we'll be seeing over the upcoming school year, how that begins to evolve. But for right now, this has been moving us into compliance federally and at a state level, and seeing what kind of tweaks and improvements we can make from what we learned from the pandemic experience. So Jennifer, I see you're there on camera. Any final thoughts or emphasis?
No, I think that we've covered everything that we wanted to talk about, and let's just pause and see if our members have any questions or comments.
Well, it's encouraging that it looks to be a rather normal testing year, assessment year. So hopefully
we hope for that. The case. I will mention that we are working towards seeing if we can have, again, a shorter assessment this year, but it will have to be longer than what we had last year. We'll have to make sure we can be federally compliant. But we're looking to see, can we shorten down the assessment, still yield information, but meet all the federal critical elements we have to have with peer review. So we're working a bit with our contractors, and by the time we get to the spring, we'll have good details coming out of Jennifer's group of how the test design will work. But if we could get what we need and take less time, everybody would be excited about that. So, and we would too. So we're going to see if we can achieve that.
So Jennifer and Rhonda, what's been the, and you may not have an answer to this because it's pretty recent. What's been the response of your office and those that you work with on the rising rates, on the rising COVID rates, and of the option of kids that are not vaccinated staying virtual this year? And if some states are already looking at that, is there any discussion of that in your office?
Well, we're watching it. We certainly, I watched the governor's press conference yesterday. It was the first one we've had in a while on COVID. I'm happy to say to the group, I'm fully vaccinated and got it as quickly as I could. And my mom lives in the house with me, and so she's in her 90s. And so we're all about being careful and being fully vaccinated. So, but I know that there was a lot of discussion yesterday about parts of the state are not as fully vaccinated as other parts of the state, and what implications that might have. From our world, we're watching that. Obviously, last year, our whole, I would say the one word we used to describe the year was flexibility. And we said we're going to be as flexible as we can in all categories. We'll be watching to see if there's anything that comes out of federal conversation. At this point, we've been told to expect to test and to expect to have accountability again in the fall of 22. That's the federal message. I know that though, you watch the national news, there's lots of issue and concern that the rate is rising in all 50 states as people begin to go back to more normal activities, but there's not necessarily high vaccination levels in some places. So we'll be watching that. If we have to adjust in some way, we certainly now have some experience with adjusting and helping schools and districts work with that. But at this point, we're pushing forward, as Nathan, I think, or someone said, to a more hopefully normal year. But, we've not heard anything, with our office, it's more about monitoring what we hear out of the federal level and then being prepared and getting prepared. And that's been one of the challenges, I think, from our daily work is we've had to move forward with preparations as if everything is a go. Even all the year we called off testing federally, we still had to have a test ready to go. So our work moves forward to the world of normal, or as normal as we can be post-pandemic. But at the same time, we could get changes or tweaks. But at this point, everything that's being said is expect to test, expect to have accountability again in the fall. With having categories, and those categories with 158 are colors. Based on status in the first year. I'm not aware of anything else. Jennifer, I don't know if you have anything you've heard that you would add to or answer differently or from my response.
We saw the CDC guidelines that came out around the schools. And then also the commissioner put out information yesterday. Mm-hmm. So we're keeping up to date with the information so that, if there is changes that are required, that we will be prepared to make those as we work.
Yeah. And I think yesterday, a lot of the focus was on the school bus and the issue of being masked when we're on a bus because CDC, it's my understanding this time it wasn't CDC guidance, it was called a CDC order, which has a little bit more force of law and was the idea of, needing to have masks. But you can obviously we'll be looking to the governor and seeing how things change over the next month or so. We're at least about a month out probably for a lot of our schools since they're starting a little later in August or even into September. So hopefully we'll get those rates coming down a little bit.
Yeah, I think that from a higher ed standpoint, we're seeing testing change a lot. So I don't know that we'll ever go back to the way it was prior to. Sure. I actually am a strong advocate of that personally, and a lot of my own research of holistic, even application processes. I think the Making Caring Common project out of Harvard is an excellent example of higher education looking at more than test scores, and I'm just hoping that K-12 kind of falls in that realm. I know it's more work. I know it's harder to not just go in and give a test and report those scores, but we're seeing even in 1 year of 2 years, actually, some schools were already ACT, SAT test optional before COVID, but now we're seeing the most elite schools do it. And what we're seeing is these conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusiveness are actually being responded to with taking away some of these guidelines. So I ask it both for just informative, but also for that connection between are we going to try to do it better, or are we just going to go back
Right.
The same
And
way we've
I
always
think,
done it.
I'll call us back to the very beginning of your meeting with Dr. Glass and then Karen talking about the coalition. I think the department as a whole is saying, how do we learn from what's happened and how do we make it better? And making it better doesn't necessarily mean going back to doing what we did. And so I do think that is the long range thinking of the department. I also think, there are steps that have to happen. There would probably need to be federally being willing to accept particular things, potentially state change. But then I also think that, we will continue to look at that and how it impacts assessment. We've talked a couple times about going back to more normal, but at the same time, we talked about, okay, can we create a shorter form that meets all the federal check boxes? So in essence, it's not quite going back to where we were, but it's hopefully an improved version of where we were. And so, because I do think we've all learned an incredible amount of how to work, how to interact, how to collaborate. I look at all your great faces right here on your little mini camera. We weren't doing that this way, less than 2 years ago. So I think I see the department, Kelly, being very willing to say, isn't this an opportunity to do something that maybe is better for students and more authentic and more engaging and better education? And all of you in your roles would play a part in that.
Thank you so much. I continue to be very impressed with Jennifer, with Rhonda, and you and Jennifer and your work. I know it's tireless, it's unappreciated. And
you all show us some love all the time, so it's not unappreciated.
The charts, right? The parents just
Right.
just get those calls, but I always feel better as an assessment measurement person knowing that the two of you have eyes on these things. So thank you.
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, we do certainly appreciate the update and just echoing what Dr. Bradley mentioned, your ongoing work with all sorts of assessments and federal regulations and everything has changed and probably will change again. We do appreciate what you're doing there in Frankfurt. Any other questions or comments?
Well, if not, I just want to wish everyone just a relaxing rest of your summer and the best as you all return back to your 21-22 school year. So best of luck to everyone.
Thank you. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
It's David Trimble. I'll make the motion.
All right.
Casey Guessens, I second.
All right. We have a motion and second. All those in favor of adjourning today's meeting, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. It looks like our next meeting will be September 21st, if everything goes as planned. Joy's always very diligent in sending out meeting notices and reminders. So thank you, Joy, for what you do there.
Well, thank you. And yes, our next meeting is September the 21st. Again, we have not heard anything from the boards and commissions office out of the governor's office as far as new appointees to SCAAC. And as you hear me say at each meeting, until we hear those names, we will be looking to you to continue your service on this group. And we so very much appreciate all of your input and the work that you do and bring to us. We really appreciate everything. And again, and I also want to remind you, I do not know if we will be meeting virtually or having in-person meetings, but as we learn more moving forward, I will communicate that to you clearly on how we are planning to have our next meeting.
All right, that sounds good. Good to see everybody again.
Always good to see you all.
Yeah, take care.